All right. Thanks again, and thanks for joining us again on your Friday afternoon. Today we're looking at a topic that's seen a lot of interest lately because of today's relatively low tax rates and recent tax law changes, and I think just the increasing number of people retiring today. We're looking at Roth conversions, a place where we're seeing a lot of potential value and opportunity for clients. I thought it would be useful to start just with a big picture view on kind of how we got to where we are today and why we're starting to see maybe some potential problems ahead. In the early 1970s, 401ks were created and companies really latched on to the idea because it eliminated these big pension liabilities that they had. And obviously some pensions still exist today, but the number of people that are retiring with a pension today is less than half of what it was just a couple of decades ago. And the average pension has also decreased. Now it's about $10,000 a year for a private employer pension. So certainly not enough to, on average, support retirement. And so retirement planning is very different today. 401ks have largely filled the void that the pension system left. And these 401ks and other investment accounts have a lot of positives. They have more flexibility with spending, potential for higher returns and more options, but they add more complexity to a financial plan, specifically when managing investments or planning for taxes. And so for decades, retirees were pushed into saving in 401ks for retirement. And because for most it was their only or at least their primary way to save for retirement, we put a lot of money into these accounts. And in doing so, received big tax deductions, which felt great at the time. And by today, more than $18 trillion has been saved into these tax-deferred accounts, 401ks and IRAs. But now as the first generation that is dependent on 401ks is retiring, we're starting to see a potential problem on the horizon. All those taxes that have been deferred for decades from that $18 trillion in savings is starting to see their tax bills beginning to come due. Because remember, these are definitely not tax-free accounts by any means. They're just tax deferred. And so a person saving for retirement has two main choices for tax-advantaged retirement savings: a tax-deferred account, such as a 401k or traditional IRA, or a Roth account. The difference between the two is simply when you pay the taxes. With a tax-deferred account, you pay later. With Roth, you pay today. And I wanted to start with a basic example just to highlight the one variable that's important when we begin to evaluate whether or not someone should do Roth conversions. The example here shows a side-by-side comparison for an investor that will always be in the, just for example, 22% tax bracket. We assume they save $5,000 today, and that $5,000 grows at 7% per year for the next decade. On the left is the tax-deferred account. This is your 401k or traditional IRA. And because the tax is deferred, all $5,000 goes into the account and gets invested. You don't pay any taxes today. After 10 years of growth, it grows to about $9,800. Then when it comes time to withdraw, now you pay your 22% tax. And after taxes, you're left with $7,671. And notice if you would have instead saved in the Roth account, you paid taxes earlier at the same 22% rate. You had less in your account at all steps in the process, but since no taxes were due at withdrawal, it all equals out at the very end. And so if you knew your tax rate would be constant for the rest of your life, we would never have to waste time on this topic. It wouldn't matter which type of account you used. And also notice that the lesson just from the simple example works regardless of the amount that we use. If we put in 1 million instead of 5,000, the results come out the same. And it comes out the same regardless of whatever growth rate we put in there, whether you think your portfolio will return 20% a year or 1%. If tax rates stay the same, it doesn't matter what type of account that you use. The primary consideration when evaluating Roths versus a tax-deferred account is your tax rate today and how it compares to the tax rate when you'll need to withdraw the money. So how do we go about projecting your future tax rate as accurately as we can? For a while, the common assumption was that when you're retired, you will have lower taxes. And that seems to make sense. You won't have your salary anymore once you retire. And if you project lower taxes at retirement, you should save in tax deferred accounts. And that's exactly what people did for decades to the tune of that $18 trillion today. And a lot of people enter early retirement and it seems like they made the right call, barring some special situations like very high spending early on in retirement. A recent retiree is usually in a very low tax bracket early on, but it doesn't always stay that way. One of the primary reasons taxes do not stay low throughout retirement is because of the rules around RMDs, or required minimum distributions. These are the withdrawals that you are required to take from your 401k or traditional IRA each year. And remember, these are tax deferred accounts, but Uncle Sam wants to make sure they eventually get their money from you. So starting at age 72 now, they start requiring you to take money out, which forces you to recognize income and therefore pay taxes. The guidelines around RMDs require you to withdraw a certain percentage of your account each year. This chart shows the changes over that time. The y-axis is the percentage of your portfolio that needs to be withdrawn each year, and the x-axis is your age. So at 72, you're required to take very roughly 4% of your account out. At age 90, that more than doubles. That means $1 million portfolio is taking $80,000 in income. And remember, that's on top of Social Security or any other income, dividends or small pension. And now maybe you start to see how with $80,000 in IRAs on top of 40 or 50,000 in Social Security and your other sources of income, a retired couple could easily see themselves back up towards incomes they had while they were working. And the moral of the story, early on, the amounts that are required to be withdrawn are low, but over time they accelerate. And this causes a bit of a chain reaction. As the RMDs increase, it forces higher income on you. Remember, withdrawals from IRAs are taxed at the ordinary income tax rate, so that's kind of why I'm referring to withdrawals as income here. And the more income you have, the more taxes you have. And the more taxes you have, the more you need to withdraw in order to pay your tax bill. And you can start to see how we're getting at a kind of feedback loop here. And in addition to just your basic income tax rate, there are all sorts of other costs that come from higher income. For those of you that have joined some of our other recent webinars, you've heard us say a few of these already. A primary one would be your Medicare Part B premium. It starts at about $144 a month, but once your income gets above a certain threshold, it jumps to $202 per month. That's per person, so a married couple would see a total jump of about $120 a month or $1,400 per year. This is called the IRMA, or the Income-Related Monthly Adjustment Amount. And this is just one example, but there's a lot more expenses you will incur as RMDs force more and more income upon you. Of course, as your withdrawals increase, you go into higher tax brackets. So maybe previously you were able to get money out of an IRA at a 12% tax rate, but as the amounts increase, it will now be a 22% tax rate. That's an extra 10% you need to withdraw for every dollar you need to pay or you need to withdraw from your account. And there's more. Your Social Security could be taxed at a higher rate. Dividends and capital gains can be taxed at a higher rate. And you might enter into, one of the many other additional taxes based on income, like net investment income tax, for example. And you can lose out on other tax credits and deductions that are all pegged to your income. A perfect example of that might be from one of our previous webinars where we talked about the stimulus package and how the benefits and tax credits are based on your income. What we're trying to show here is that increasing RMDs over time lead to this chain reaction of higher taxes, which means you need more money withdrawn to pay those taxes, which means you incur more taxes withdrawing, and so on. To show you an impact of these rising taxes over time and how a Roth conversion plan can improve this, I wanted to start with just a real simple example. For this example, we're assuming a married couple age 67 and in Iowa. It's important to know state taxes also play a big role here. We've just kind of mentioned federal recently, and we'll mention federal for most of this, but state taxes are also a big deal, especially for Iowa, a relatively high tax state. This couple's been diligent savers, and between the two of them have $1 million in their IRAs. That million is invested in a standard portfolio that returns 7% per year. They have average Social Security benefits, with each receiving $2,500 per month. And they want to spend $80,000 a year for the first 10 years of their retirement, and then anticipate dropping down to $70,000 per year until the end of their plan. And it's not written here, but we're also going to include 3% inflation in all of these numbers. And to start, I will say this is a very successful plan. With these assumptions, we'd be very confident to tell this hypothetical couple that their retirement is, very possible. They shouldn't worry about it. But that doesn't mean it can't be improved upon. This chart represents the taxable income that this hypothetical couple has for each year of their retirement. The y-axis represents their taxable income. And note this is taxable income, so it's only a portion of Social Security that's taxed, and then it's also after the $26,100 standard deduction for those over age 65. Then the x-axis is just each year of the plan. Each color in the chart represents a tax rate of the income. Blue is a 10% tax, orange is 12%, the tan is 22%, and so on. And as you get more taxable income, you fill up those lower tax brackets. Any additional money is taxed at a higher tax rate. So whether we're talking about me or Bill Gates, the first $19,000 of both of our incomes is taxed at the exact same rate, at 10%. But as you earn more, any additional income above these thresholds gets taxed at higher rates. So if you have high income, it's eventually taxed at rates up over 30%. And I think the big takeaway here is pretty obvious. Retirees tend to focus on these early years of retirement when their tax rates are low, but they fail to look out over the horizon and see what's potentially ahead. Because over time, even this couple that is far from ultra wealthy like Bill Gates is going to be subject to very high tax rates over time as their RMDs increase and force them into higher and higher tax brackets. You can see by the end of their plan, they're up into the 32% tax bracket. And just for a benchmark, we said we have a successful plan here based on our assumptions, and this couple would be left with about $3.3, almost $3.4 million left over at the end of their plan. Just to note, this is not an inflation adjusted number, so that 3.3 million won't be the same at 30 years from now as what we think of, $3 million today. So it looks really high, but that's a little bit deceiving. But just we'll come back and revisit this $3.3 million later. So what could this couple do to improve the situation? This is a very common looking chart for anyone with a significant portion of their savings in a tax deferred account. When we look at this, we see a potential opportunity. If this retiree could pull out a little extra money early in their retirement, it would be taxed at a 12% tax rate, for example. And in exchange for taking that money out today, we can avoid them paying that 32% tax later. We're trying to spread out this tax liability, and by spreading it out, it subjects that to lower tax rates because of the way our tax laws work. And when we see this chart and go over it with clients, we're literally showing them, visualizing moving some of this money later on in the plan at higher tax rates forward to today or in upcoming years where it's, you can fill in these lower tax brackets. And this is exactly where Roth conversions come in. For a quick review, a Roth conversion is simply moving money from a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA. But it requires a small step in the middle, and that's paying taxes to get the money out. But in exchange for paying those taxes today, it never is taxed again. So if you can pay 12% taxes on the money today in exchange for preventing 32% taxes later, hopefully you start to see some potential value unlocked here. And so just a quick revisit, we're going to look at the impact of a very simple Roth conversion plan that this couple could do. As a reminder, here's their tax burden before the conversions, and here's their tax burden after. Notice that there are more taxes paid early on. That's because we are converting a certain amount from the traditional IRAs into Roth IRAs, or forcing this couple to recognize income early on in their retirement. We've added pretty significantly to the ending portfolio balance and cut the taxes nearly in half. Notice the difference in tax savings is not equal to the difference in portfolio value. This is because comparing the portfolio value of a 401k or an IRA with a Roth IRA is not quite an apples to apples comparison. Just simply a $1 million 401k is not really $1 million to you because Uncle Sam owns part of that in taxes. However, $1 million in a Roth IRA, every dollar in that account's yours. So an $850,000 Roth IRA probably actually has more value than a $1 million 401k for most retirees. And that's why the big tax savings we see here doesn't exactly create a dollar for dollar change in the portfolio value. But on a tax adjusted basis, this new portfolio, which is primarily in Roth balances, is actually worth a lot more than just the $364,000 compared to the other portfolio that it originally appears. And this is a look behind the scenes of some of the numbers as we've done this Roth conversion plan for this couple. Because Roth IRAs do not have RMDs, we've eliminated a lot of RMDs that would occur later in the plan. And in result, that's lowered the taxes that this couple has had to or will have to pay. And again, what we always point out is that you're making some smaller sacrifice today by way of higher taxes today in exchange for saving, usually a very large amount in the future. So now maybe you start to see the potential value in Roth conversions, but that doesn't mean they're right for everyone. So when do they make sense and when do they not make sense? To start, this is a generalization, but we noticed that there's kind of this tipping point for those around maybe $750,000 in tax deferred accounts. I want to be clear, it's important to note this does not mean if you have less than that Roth conversions don't make sense. They can still have a lot of value, but with amounts like this, we start to see long-term compounding really start to take off. And it creates these really big tax liabilities later in retirement if these tax deferred accounts are left to grow. Roth conversions are also good for those with a low income for a certain period. Usually this means early in retirement, especially if you're delaying Social Security or delaying a pension to get the increased benefits. Or if you just retired early, maybe a 60-year-old retiring. Roth IRAs are also much better to leave to heirs. If your child, for example, were to inherit an IRA or 401k, they pay taxes when they take that money out of the account they'll inherit. And with the new tax law change, they have to take that out. They have to take that money out even faster, which means more taxes for them. So if your child is high income, the value of your IRA or 401k gets tacked on top of their already high salary, which generally means a higher tax rate for them. Roth IRAs are not taxed at all, so the money can go to them tax-free, and when they take the money out, it doesn't add to their tax burden. That's a huge difference for some. And of course, we're just estimating the future here, we know that written into law is a small tax increase in 2026, but of course, if taxes were to increase in the future, Roth conversions would become even more valuable. I also think there's a little bit of value in knowing, that you've locked in your tax liability in retirement by doing Roth conversions. It's nice to kind of get rid of one unknown in the future. And Roth conversions provide a lot of value for times when you have irregular expenses in retirement. Remember, if you need to withdraw an extra amount in retirement, say $40,000 for a house down payment or a new car, you're going to pay an increasingly high tax rate on that withdrawal. Having some Roth money available allows you some flexibility in where you get your money from in retirement. You can use your IRAs to fill those low tax brackets each year, and then switch over and use Roth balances to supplement your income that you need and still keep your taxes down. And one last important topic is longevity for either one or both spouses. This is the same couple we looked at before, but if one of the spouses passes at age 85 while the other lives to 95. And because of the way our tax brackets work, when one spouse passes, the surviving spouse falls into a different set of tax brackets, which results in higher tax rates for them. This is important for this example couple because the surviving spouse will still effectively have the same amount of assets, the same RMDs are going to be required, but that same amount of income will be taxed at a higher rate. You can see here the red line represents the time that one of the spouses passes, and you can see the income level or the absolute height of these bars stays similar, but the colors are different. That's the higher tax rate that this surviving spouse is paying. A lot more of that income's getting taxed at the 24% and 32% than it was if they were married. And there are some times when Roth conversions, simply don't make sense. One big caveat we like to make sure people understand is that charities, don't pay income taxes. So if you have money that you are planning to give to charity or know you want to give to charity, it doesn't mean you should not do any Roth conversions, but we might want to do less to make sure we're leaving some money in those tax deferred accounts. It does no good for you to pay taxes first and then give that money to charity when you can just donate the money, pre-tax to charity. High spending is another scenario, and specifically high spending relative to your tax deferred balances. As a very general rule, if you'd be spending, a lot more than your RMDs throughout retirement, these conversions might not be beneficial. And then, of course, the big caveat, we don't know what will happen with tax rates or tax laws in the future. If you do Roth conversions and tax rates decrease, it may not be as advantageous. And while we think the likelihood is, incredibly rare just from precedents, tax laws can always change, and the way IRAs or Roth IRAs are treated is always subject to change. And we wanted to end with just looking at our role in the process of developing a Roth conversion plan for you guys. For those that have begun to have these talks with us, it's been the subject of at least a couple meetings, and we think that's a good thing. Building a Roth conversion plan requires us to think about a lot of other financial planning topics, and how you want your assets to be distributed after you pass can make a huge difference on whether or not Roth conversions could be right for you, or whether you take Social Security at full retirement age or delay till age 70 creates a very different picture of conversion amounts that would be available. But we think that this work on both our parts, you and us, is worth it. There's potential for significant improvement in your financial plan with Roth when a Roth conversion strategy is involved. And it's also a long-term process. This is never, a one-time decision. You click a button and it's done, which is good. It gives you some flexibility. Your likely going to be converting a portion of your assets for years or even a decade. And each year we recalculate the optimal amount, and it can change any given year as your situation changes. And so we like to point out you're never locking yourself into a specific decision here. We want you to be comfortable with the long-term plan, but it's always just a year by year basis that we're making these conversions. And lastly, we like to point out for our clients where we're managing their assets that doing Roth conversions actually lowers the fees that we charge you, since you're paying those tax liabilities, getting those tax liabilities out of your account now. That this highlights our fiduciary duty to you, but I hope it also shows you how strongly we feel that, if we suggest this course of action for you, we really do believe it's a good long-term decision for you. And, unfortunately, I think this is maybe also a reason it's not as popular of a strategy to recommend with a lot of other financial advisors, just because, it can be a hit on your income if a lot of your clients are doing this. But that's all I had prepared for today. Thanks for hanging on with us for this webinar. We felt like it was an important topic to cover, and we aired, on the side of a little bit more detail in a couple places. So thanks again. Have a great weekend and take care.
All right, thank you, Matt. Yep, it's been an interesting topic for a lot of people lately. I noticed with some of the people who have joined, we've already begun these discussions, and with a couple of people, we've already started the conversions. So maybe one thing to point out to Matt for people who are interested in this is that although it's good to do the legwork early in the year, especially at times where we can have a chance to meet with you and talk through everything, we typically actually execute the conversions later in the year once you're more certain about what your actual income will be for the year. Because although there's no penalty if you over convert, you may just be converting at an amount that is taxed at a higher amount than what you really wanted if your income goes up, for example. So we usually actually perform conversions in November and December, but like to do the meetings and getting everything prepped ahead of time. Just a quick question for you, Matt. I don't think I'm putting you on the spot, but given the recent stock market drop with the coronavirus issue, do you see any difference? Maybe you just speak for just a moment as to why that has spurred a little bit of discussion about doing more Roth conversions in the media, and then also maybe some guidance on what we've thought through with clients, and if there's any reason to do more Roth conversions right at this particular moment.
Yeah, I think there has been a lot of press on, the stock market's decline. Now's a great time to do Roth conversions. And it seems like a lot of that is based on, the thinking of that you'd convert your whole account. And it could make sense for someone with a small IRA, maybe a younger client whose, IRA went from $100,000 to $50,000, and now they can convert that whole amount for less than they would have. But we just find, I think, with our clients, it's never going to make sense to convert their whole account in 1 year. It'd be a huge tax bill. And that, we have an amount targeted to fill up a certain tax bracket or recognize a certain amount of income. And we're going to, it would be advantageous to do that amount, whether the stock market has been up or down. And like that very early example we showed, if tax rates stay the same, whatever your return is in your IRA or Roth IRA is doesn't have the impact. What has the impact is the future tax rates. And so, I think it's a very select amount of people that should take a real aggressive action because of this, the recent stock market decline.
Yep. Okay. And also, we always want to caution people, just because the market's gone down 20 or 30% doesn't mean it couldn't go down more as well. So yeah. We're never trying to time things based for most of our planning based on what the market's actually doing. Good. Okay. Are there any verbal questions from the group? Okay. That's all right. And if you have a question that you want to email us about or set up an appointment, we are happy to do that. We, as you probably know, we are actively working, most of us out of the office right now, but happy to do client meetings and appointments. Also jump on this. We have actually two of these Roth conversion plan meetings next week with a couple, with a newer client and with a very long-term client who's now coming up on retirement. So very active topic right now. You would get analysis that looks very much like what Matt presented, but specific to your situation. And so glad that you could join and see this and see kind of how we walk through it. But we would certainly dive into greater detail with you in your particular situation. So. Good. Well, if anybody would like to stay on, feel free. We are happy to stay here and chat. Otherwise, if you have any questions, and also I'll just put in a plug too, if you have any suggestions for other topics, all of the topics that we've covered so far have, I think, all come from client questions or suggestions. We like doing these topics, trying to address in greater detail some things that you have interest in. I will especially say I like doing it because Matt gets to do a lot of the prep work and he's great at doing this. So happy to entertain more questions as we, over email or if you want to call or anything like that. We like getting those in. Okay. Oh, wait. All right. So I see. Okay. So one question came in. Matt, thought we had a quick contributing, I won't say names out loud, just try to keep this, because we also share these recordings on our website afterwards too. So thought we had to quit contributing to Roths at a certain age.
And then, yeah, so with Roths, you have to have what earned income, right? And so a lot of people that are retired just, simply don't have earned income. You can't use Social Security or you can't use, dividends or anything like that. And yeah, so I think that's probably the limiting factor for.
Yep. So that's a good point. So with and they've recently changed the rules on traditional IRAs as well, but for Roths, that was always a good option for people who are working, past 65, past 70, now past 72, which is the RMD age. And Roths always gave you that flexibility. But to reiterate with Matt, a lot of people just can't do it because they don't have qualifying income. There's also, good reminder there too. If you're contributing directly to a Roth, you have to, not usually a problem if you're entering retirement, you have to have low enough income to qualify to. For a couple, it's right around $200,000 in adjusted gross income that you need to be below in order to contribute directly for a Roth. But we just want to be careful about how we say that. Those are direct contributions, as in, you're taking money from your checking account and putting it into a Roth. There are no income limitations. You don't even have to have income in order to do Roth conversions. Conversions can be done regardless of your age, your income level, anything like that.
Yeah, good.
Oh, good question. Oh, yeah, so just follow-up question there. The conversions and contributions are totally different rules with Roths. Contribution is where you're taking money from some outside account, a checking account, you have cash at home, anything like that, and putting money into the Roth IRA. A conversion is specifically moving from a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA. And for doing conversions, there are no restrictions whatsoever on your age or your income. You can do Roth conversions at any point for those rules. Good, thanks. All right. Any other questions out there? Oh yeah, okay. So this is always an interesting point in the rules. IRA rules are really complex, by the way. It can be a struggle. Obviously, you are people who are joining the call because you are interested in and have financial advisors. So you will try to rely on us for these things, but it's always good for you to know this. And honestly, a lot of planners and advisors get tripped up on these occasionally too. We try to always double check things before we actually do anything because for whatever reason, IRA rules, actually I know the reason. IRA rules are complicated because it all has to do with taxes, and you can imagine the government wants to be very careful about making sure that eventually the taxes come in and nobody is taking advantage of the rules around IRAs. So there is a rule around conversions and starting what we call a 5-year clock. It applies to I believe I'm going to say this with relative certainty. It applies to the calendar year in which you create that conversion. So as of January 1st of this calendar year, if you do a conversion in 2020, and the rule is that you should keep the money in that account for that amount of time. And this is a specific rule to conversions. It's different, again, and just to be very careful about my language, contributions to Roth accounts, where you're taking that money from like a checking account or from your workplace 401k or something like that. Contributions to a Roth account are different rules. Your contributions can be withdrawn in the next day. I mean, there's rules around the earnings in that. Again, we don't want to get into all of that, but yeah, conversions do have a clock, as we call it, for 5 years for making sure that you keep that money in there. Matt, double check me if I said anything correctly in there as I was prattling on.
Yeah, no, I think that 5 years is for if you're under 59 and a half. Is that right?
Oh, that may see, these are complex rules. So
Yeah.
I will double check after we talk, but that is something that with and I guess to the point of Roth conversion plans in general though, just to give people a sense of this, just as reminders, because Matt went through this, but a good reminder, if you have a large IRA, say $1 million or more, we would never convert that entire thing in one tax year. It will always be spaced out, sometimes over a long period of time, like 10 years, sometimes less. And so there would be, during those times, the idea with those conversions, those new Roth amounts that you're getting out of that amount is to sit there and grow as part of your investment portfolio for a long period of time. We would not be looking to immediately tap that money for living expenses or things like that. That was a little bit of the point Matt had made with, if you need living expenses that are high compared to your IRA balance, sometimes the math here doesn't work out so well. So those balances that are converted are really intended to sit there for later in retirement. They can be tapped later. It doesn't mean that they can't be spent, but they can be tapped later. So yeah, just to give you some sense of that, it's one reason we're not usually real nervous about that clock starting on conversions, because the idea is that this money wouldn't be spent. It would be one of the last bits of your resources that you would want to spend much later in retirement. All right, good. All right, thanks for some of the questions there. With that, why don't we wrap this up. We will send out the recording of this. If you know somebody that you would like to share this with, we encourage you to do that. As you probably know, we're pretty light touch on talking with people about their situations if they have questions. Just also know, to Matt's earlier point, some financial planners don't do this because their incentives for doing it are misaligned with their client. And so we are happy to talk to people about doing Roth conversions, even if they're not clients, just to help them understand it. So, all right, good. With that, we'll wrap it up for today. Thanks for joining. If you have anything else, just let us know and we'll follow up with you separately. Thanks all. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.